I try to imagine a fellow smarter than myself, and then I try to think, what would he do?
Charge up your axons, ready your receptors, and shift your lobes into upper beta phase. You are listening to Smart Drug Smarts, the podcast dedicated to helping you optimize your brain with the latest breakthroughs in neuroscience, nootropics, and psychopharmacology.
Hello and welcome to Smart Drug Smarts. I am your host, Jesse Lawler, excited to bring you the latest episode, number 49, in this podcast dedicated to the betterment of your own brain by any and all means at your disposal. I'd like to give a special little thank you at the beginning of this episode to my friend Jimmy Hayes, who lent me the microphone that I'm recording this. I actually really like the sound of this microphone. It's a very clear one. And like I said, my old mic took a Humpty Dumpty-like fall not too long ago, and I haven't gotten it replaced yet, but Jimmy spotted me a microphone, and we are all in his debt. Speaking of friends, this is like actually kind of a special Smart Drug Smarts episode in that I'm interviewing somebody who I actually know from my real life. This is somebody who I've known actually since prior to starting the whole Smart Drug Smarts podcast. I'm not like a bosom buddy of this guy, but he's somebody whose establishment I had frequented on a few occasions. A guy named Crash. I'm not sure if Crash has a last name or if it's like Madonna, and I kind of doubt that Crash is what's on his driver's license, but that's how he introduced himself. Crash owns a flotation tank company in Venice Beach, California. For those of you who don't know, flotation tanks, also known as sensory deprivation tanks, are basically like a closed-off environment that you get into. You're floating in this warm tub of water that's the same temperature as the exterior of your skin. The air is the same temperature as the water. There's no light. There's no sound. So basically, you've got a completely zero stimuli environment that you're in for, however long you're in this thing. And your brain tends to do real interesting things real fast when it's completely starved of any sort of sensory input. So not exactly a smart drugs episode because nothing pharmaceutical about this one, but definitely, since we're all interested in brain stuff here, flotation tanks offer a really interesting way of getting a look at what your brain does in some sort of exotic situations. And if you hang around until the end of the episode, I'm going to let you know about a new tactic that science might have found to battle jet lag, which has been plaguing the human species pretty much ever since we figured out air travel. Now scientists might have found something that's a little bit promising, but we'll see. And of course, before we get into any of that, let's do This Week in Neuroscience.
Smart Drug Smarts. This Week in Neuroscience.
Okay, so this is an inaptly named This Week in Neuroscience because this is actually from a research article published in 2005 in the American Society for Clinical Investigation's Journal of Clinical Investigation. This came across my desk this week, and I thought this was a really interesting one because it actually flew in the face of, I think, probably what most people believe to be the case, which is that marijuana might actually promote neurogenesis. I say might. According to this study, it does actually promote neurogenesis both in an embryonic and adult brain, that some of the psychoactive compounds within the marijuana plant called cannabinoids promote both embryonic and adult hippocampus neurogenesis. Hippocampus is a part of the brain that, among other things, is deeply involved in the formation of memory and is one of the main areas where non-embryonic brains continue to produce new brain cells, up to 5,000 brain cells per day in adults. This tapers off over the course of the lifespan, but interestingly, cannabinoids tend to foster and promote this neurogenesis and produce anxiolytic and antidepressant-like effects. Anxiolytic, which I very much hope I'm pronouncing correctly, basically means anxiety decreasing. Now, another interesting wrinkle in this is there's something called endocannabinoids, which are cannabinoids that are synthesized naturally by the human body. These tend to actually reduce hippocampal neurogenesis, but the plant-derived cannabinoids have the opposite effect. It really kind of flies in the face of what one would assume, especially with all the cultural baggage that we bring along with stoned out potheads not necessarily seeming like they have the best memory. But marijuana is a really interesting plant for a whole lot of reasons. I'm really trying to get a marijuana expert on one of the upcoming episodes to talk about some of the conflicting and counterintuitive science around this plant. I'm not a pot person myself, but some of the stuff you read kind of makes you wonder if maybe you should be. But stay tuned and wait for that episode. In the meantime, let's move on.
Smart Drug Smarts.
And in slightly less relevant, but nevertheless excellent news, picked up another 5-star review by Coffee956324, who said, "Been enjoying the show since the beginning. Hope it continues for a while. Great interviews, information, and accessibility." And of course, we're talking about iTunes, the most important platform, although there are several. I should not undercut our friends at Stitcher and stuff like that, but of all the places that syndicate podcasts, iTunes is the biggest one. And if you want to throw a bone to your old friends at Smart Drug Smarts, it is definitely helpful for us to let other folks know about it it through the iTunes secret magical search algorithm to throw up some good reviews. We've got a nice number of high star rating reviews now, which makes me do little jigs when no one's looking, and really appreciate everybody who's taken the time to do that. And now let's segue into our main interview, which, as I said, is with Crash. Unlike a lot of the interviews that we've done over the course of the podcast, where some of the drugs in question I haven't taken and some of the technologies in question I had not yet tried, this is one I actually have tried for myself, and I can really vouch that it is quite the interesting experience. I'll go into my own thoughts a little at the end, but suffice it to say that I was enough of a fan of my flotation tank experience that as soon as it occurred to me to make this episode, I knew it was something that I had to do. So with no further ado, Crash. Can you give for the absolute layperson a description of what a flotation tank is and why somebody should care?
Yeah, it's a chamber containing 1,000 pounds of Epsom salts or so. It's then melted into a water. So you're looking at 4 pounds of Epsom salts per gallon in this solution that's in this container now that it ranges in size 4 to 6 feet wide. And then ours are 7 feet tall and then 8 feet long. And then you're inside of this container with this solution. And the solution is about a foot or so deep. And then you're in the dark because when the door goes closed, there's no light. And then the walls are thick and well insulated, so they're resistant to sound. So the concept there is when you're in this environment, you're also not required for the gravity navigation due to the density of the solution itself, which is heated up to your outside skin temperature, roughly 94, 95 degrees. The temperature of the solution is then to blend you in with it, where it's not warm or cold, but more or less neutral. So you're in a neutral feeling, so you really don't, feel anything. And then it's dark, so your reference is not there. And then the lack of sound. So they thought in the beginning that once you turn the stimulation to the brain off, the brain would shut down. But what they illustrated, I guess, through some sort of testing they had done at some point in history, that when they shut the stimulation off to the brain, it actually goes on because it's actually searching for something to do. Once you take away all the stimulus, it's still actively pursuing a task. So it's interesting if you could direct that, inwardly to consider certain aspects of your own personal development then that you might want to focus on in order to, let's say, make changes or modifications or even reinforce some of your ideas maybe that you have that perhaps somebody else said, hey, that's not the best idea or whatever like that. And you go in there and you take a gander at it from the perspective which, you feel like it should be considered. And you see maybe it is valid.
How long do people normally stay in one of these tanks where they are, completely cut off from the outside stimulus?
Here in Venice, or we're opening another place in Westwood as well, we have 2-hour sessions for $40 where we let the people stay for 2 hours. And if they want to get out, feel free to go ahead and split. That's cool.
Yeah, it's not like there's a lock on the door.
No, very easy to get in and out of. We probably got about 90% of the people make it the full 2 hours. And that's quite a long time to be in there with yourself thinking about you.
Right. Yeah, that sort of sounds a lot like sort of the Buddhist philosophies, which makes me think and ask, how many of the people that are, especially your repeat customers, that aren't people that are doing it sort of as a one-time, like, oh, this would be weird, but people that come back for many, many sessions. So what's the crossover between that and meditation and meditators?
That was in the beginning what I thought was interesting because some of these guys, they come in and they were this chic and this. I used to get to do stuff I don't get to do anymore in there with a deep type of stuff that really it takes a bit to get to that, what that is. And I used to be we're thinking, well, these guys, they got the Swami or they got the chic and all the hat and they got the credentials. And then I noticed that these people in the chamber there, they didn't have these chops. I mean, they weren't as deep as I thought they would be based on their practices that related to other issues. Like if they were practiced at these meditations and stuff, doesn't make them anything except for not exceptional. I mean, it's not to be considered because somebody has practiced at these other things that gives them any kind of expertise in this other thing, which is what blew my mind because I thought they would be able to, get their mind in a lot of cases, but I didn't see that. I see sometimes kids or people that don't have any background in any kind of discipline, and they go way out there, because being disciplined itself is something you're holding on to. and your concepts about what that discipline represents and the process it took you to get to be disciplined and what you were told. And that's all stuff that can be done without too. Between these people that are skilled at that one thing and then this thing, I think it could be considered to be an advantage for sure, because, it's another level of the same thing. But it is indeed another level of it. I mean, you still have to go through, and it's a stronger tap than sitting in a room ohming, I think.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. It really is such an otherworldly experience. I remember before I'd been into a flotation tank, I had, my vision of it was incorrect. I remember in Empire Strikes Back, the Star Wars movie, there's, Luke Skywalker at the beginning, he's completely submerged in a vertical fish tank with a mask feeding him oxygen hooked up to his face, but he's completely underwater. And I was kind of thinking that a sensory deprivation tank was something like that. And also that was a term that I had in my head was sensory deprivation tank versus flotation tank. Are there two different things? Does the Luke Skywalker version actually exist, or is that just, some complete fanciful misconception that I had?
I think the original one that they did, that Lilly built, was a vertical one. The horizontal one, I think, has the most comfort to it, where you're not encumbered by the apparatus there that would require the other way. They were hooked into a breathing modality and whatnot, and that. As far as I know.
So you've seen so many thousands of people go in and out over the years. What do you see as some of the commonalities versus the people that really love this experience and the people that freak out and aren't comfortable with it?
We don't ever hang around down there. Once we get them in there, we kind of go up to the office and let the people deal with themselves. And that is where the issues are developed from, is these people, they'll be in there with themselves and the thing doesn't do anything at all. What we do is get it really clean, and we have a certified system. We're the only company in the world that actually manufactures NSF 50 certified systems that are also UL listed. That'll be happening at the end of the month. Underwriters Laboratory for Electrical Safety. So these are all aspects of what it is that we do. As far as what we provide has to do with the equipment and the stuff like that, where we just give you a little bit of an orientation, and then say, okay, have a nice time there with yourself. We don't want to have a chat afterwards or have a cookie. We're not gonna, some people want to talk or whatever like that. We're not into the psychological, evaluate. We have no real interest in getting that involved with people. So what we do is just try to set up a thing where they can come in and do their thing and then split, and. So we don't ever really find out too much. But people come back. What's funny, though, is a lot of these people that seem to be on the edge of having a trouble with themselves, to where they weren't going to be able to allow themselves to do this for some reason or whatever, they would, once they get in there, they're fine. Because it's a manufactured fear that's not based on anything real. It's a concept that they have derived from a vision that they have without anything to really base it on. There's no model there. So instead of finding out what's actually the deal, they become creative and create a frightening style of a situation that doesn't exist. But once they get past that and they're in there, then they go, oh, wow, this is okay. I'm not scared at all. I was only scared because I didn't know what I was doing. Now I'm here. I'm not scared, I can dig this. And the way that's happened is because when you come down 2 hours later, they're still there. They're okay now. Once they got in, they're fine. Going in a little shaky sometimes, But it's new ground for people. It's understandable,
Yeah, absolutely. How long has this technology been around? How long have people been doing this?
Oh, there was a guy, John Lilly, that invented it in the 50s. What our company, Float Lab, has been focused on for ever so long is the regulations and the standards that have been we've been working on with the authorities then to regulate and monitor and otherwise be included in the operational practices of these locations where people are coming in here and getting into the solution right after somebody else did. We've been working with NSF, these guidelines set up for health and safety.
I've always been kind of fascinated that it's not something which is a better known, more frequently used. It like to me, it's akin to jumping out of an airplane. It's like everybody's kind of curious, like, oh yeah, it'd be fun to jump out of an airplane once in my life. Or, I mean, I guess there's enough drop zones where like a lot of people do, but I feel like the number of people that have jumped out of an airplane versus the number of people that have ever been in a sensory deprivation tank is really, really skewed. It's such a neat, unique experience, and even unlike something where there's an element of physical danger and more of a panic response like jumping out of an airplane, essentially a flotation tank is really accessible to everybody, like young, old, healthy, sick, and I'm kind of surprised that it's not more of a popular thing.
Well, we've been trying to build the cart before we put the horses out there. I think we now have a rig that is respectable, and we can put it into circulation now in these venues that are credible and that are ready to go.
You're located in Venice Beach, California, which is sort of like a well-known like head shop place. How much psychedelics use is part of the flotation lab culture? Is it a major part? Is it a minor part? I mean, obviously there's some, but like how much are you catering to people that are not only sort of going into their own heads by taking away all the distractions, but are also dosing themselves with something before they get in there?
Well, we have the military on that one. We're don't ask, don't tell. That's the way we do it. I'm sure, like I said, there are people that have done the things in there, but the majority of people, I think, have used that by itself. The guy in the parking guy said, a lot of these cars smell like weed that pull in here. You certainly probably wouldn't be the best place to get started on yourself if that was where you were showing up, is down in there doing something freaky, We certainly don't encourage it, that's for sure. You see, we would hate to be included in somebody's negative vibe because they had a negative vibe about something else. So it's kind of like standing on your own 2 feet, and you're willing to say, listen, man, we're not really on anybody's side at all. We're just trying to hand something off here that you can use for you, how you feel best about it.
Smart Drug Smarts.
So thank you very much to Crash for spending that time talking with us about the strange and interesting world of sensory deprivation tanks. I've done this a couple of times now, and I guess, so a couple of pieces of advice from me based on my 2 experiences in sensory deprivation tanks. The first time I did it, I actually rode my bicycle it was a Sunday morning as I remember it, and I probably rode about 10, 12 miles across Los Angeles before winding up at the beach where Crash has his facility. And so by the time I got there, I was physically tired because I'd just done a pretty good bike ride, but it was still first thing in the morning, like maybe 10 o'clock after a full night's sleep, so I was very cognitively awake, which was, I think, kind of by sheer accident, the perfect way to do it, because my body was tired, my brain was awake, I had a 2-hour session, I was fully awake the entire time, and my brain had a lot of energy to take advantage of the weird situation that I was in. The second time that I did it much later in the day, and I fell asleep for probably, I would guess, maybe half the time that I was in there. Again, one of the weird things about this is that there's no way of knowing what time it is. Your subjective sense of the passage of time gets really screwed up, so you don't know how much of the time you're awake, how much of the time you're asleep when something like that happens. Anyway, but I fell asleep the second time. I'm sure I got really great restful sleep because it's a super sleep-inducing sort of environment, but on the other hand, it's not as much cognitive bang for the buck. So what I guess I want to underscore is just what a strange state your brain gets into when it's got nothing but sort of an unlimited amount of free time and nothing to entertain it but itself. So you can sort of lapse into memory and think about things, revisit experiences, but inevitably you kind of wind up thinking about, well, okay, what's an important thing that I should do next in my life, either in the near term, like the next couple of days, or big picture stuff, like what do I want the next 3 to 5 years to be like? And so you start kind of making all these lists of like to-do lists, but of course you can't write anything down. But I remember I started sort of visualizing like, okay, this thing on a list, that thing on a list. And because your brain is so starved of any sensory input, you're sort of visualizing like typing this into one of your note-taking programs on your computer or writing it on a piece of scratch paper. And these hallucinations become very, very convincing. And it's so easy after a while to forget that they're just mental constructions. They're just hallucinations. And I kind of remember coming to or having the epiphany, like, wait a minute, all these notes I've been taking aren't physical notes. If I don't actually remember this with some sort of mnemonic device, all these good ideas are going to be gone. And I feel like, after I've been in there for a long, long time with nothing but my thoughts, I had a lot of good ideas. But then the problem was, how do I store these things to collect them later? And I started thinking about how ineffectual it would be to be a point of consciousness without the ability to intersect with the physical universe and actually have sort of a physical substrate for the ideas that you as a consciousness are able to create. And I started thinking about, wow, this would be like to be a ghost or a spirit or something like that. You can have all these thoughts and awareness and epiphany and reflection, but no ability to directly impact the physical world. So really kind of like very psychedelic head trip kind of stuff. But what's interesting about the sensory deprivation tank experience is you can get your brain into one of these very strange states completely naturally. And I just think it's such an interesting opportunity that anybody who hasn't tried one of these things, I would highly encourage it. But enough of my philosophical musings. Now let's get to the ruthless listener retention gimmick.
Smart Drug Smarts. Ruthless listener retention gimmick.
Okay, so if you've ever had a long distance flight longitudinally going more than a couple time zones or more than a couple hours in either direction, losing time, gaining time, you've probably experienced jet lag, the uncomfortable feeling that your body's just not really in sync with when it's getting dark, when it's getting light. You're waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're drowsy by 10 o'clock in the morning, whatever it is. Nobody likes jet lag, but it's been a problem that we haven't been able to shake since we started doing air travel. So in an effort to save us all from future jet lag, scientists once again took some mice and altered their DNA to start screwing with them. So first of all, let's think about how your body actually keeps its circadian rhythms. There's two interlocking systems that go on. One is that every single cell in your body, not all of them, but almost all of them, have sort of a method of keeping time themselves. There's a particular protein that's made that degrades over the course of about 24 hours, but while it exists, it prevents the expression of the piece of DNA that caused it to be created in the first place. So basically, it's created and it keeps more copies of itself from being created until it's worn out its usefulness within the cell, has degraded to nothing, and then another copy of it springs into existence. And this sort of creation, degradation, destruction, creation, degradation, destruction, creation, degradation, destruction cycle is how each cell keeps its time. That happens almost on a 24-hour cycle, but of course these cells aren't perfect, and so they kind of need like a master clock to keep them all knowing if they've gotten a little bit fast, a little bit slow. The master clock within the body is something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is a part of the hypothalamus within the brain that actually gets direct input from the eyes telling it, hey, when we look around in the world out there, are we seeing daylight or are we not? So the suprachiasmatic nucleus is about a 10,000 neuron packet of the brain. These are networked cells that are all kind of comparing notes with one another constantly, receiving information from the outside world and giving sort of a master drumbeat that the individual metronomes within each of the cells can perk up their little cellular ears for and stay in tune with this master clock. Problem is that this networked suprachiasmatic nucleus has a lot of sort of inertia to it, and when you all of a sudden put yourself in a different time zone where the sunlight's coming at different times of day, there's this biochemical inertia. Takes a long time, sometimes about 8 days, to fully reset itself to the new time. So these clever scientists created these mice that have a missing vasopressin receptor. Vasopressin is a hormone within the body and the brain that does a lot of different things. One thing it does is sort of regulate water levels, so it tells you things like when you need to pee, when you don't need to pee, and controls just how watery your blood is able to get. Also has something to do with the laying down of memories in the hippocampus. But apropos to this discussion, it has also something to do with the way that these cells within the suprachiasmatic nucleus exchange information about what their collective drumbeat should be. And so by disrupting the brain's ability to receive vasopressin in the neurons, the suprachiasmatic nucleus is not really able to do its job as a functional group of 10,000 interlocked neurons. They're more like the neurons in the rest of your body that kind of keep their own time, although they're also receiving input from the sun. So these mice that their brethren in this study that were normal took about 8 days to handle a major change in day-night cycles to simulate jet lag, whereas the mutant mice with no vasopressin receptors took half that time. So literally 4 days instead of 8 to fully reset and get completely smoothly on the new cycle. Does this mean that frequent travelers want to mess up their own ability to process, at least temporarily, vasopressin so they can more quickly get over the jet lag hump? Probably a bit premature to say that because, as we said, vasopressin has a lot of different things that it controls within the body, and it might not be worth messing up your blood chemistry or how frequently you need to run to the bathroom just to get over jet lag a few days faster. But it's a really interesting finding, and I thought the article was interesting just because I had no understanding earlier of how the circadian rhythms within the body are actually kept, knowing that there's sort of this micro level clock within each of the cells, and then this overall master level clock within the brain is one of those things that makes you just sort of stand back in awe of science and evolution and say, wow. It also makes me wonder, and I don't have the answer to this. If anybody listening knows, I'd love to hear the answer. I was really interested to hear that it's the visual stimuli of sunlight that sort of guides this master clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it made me wonder about people that are fully blind and have no visual input whatsoever. How do they handle jet lag? Is that a secret boon to being a blind person that you can get over jet lag quickly? I don't know the answer to that. I would love to know the answer to that.
Smart Drug Smarts, the podcast so smart, we have smart in our title twice.
Okay, that is the episode. If you liked what you heard, please recommend this podcast to your friends and or leave us a review on iTunes. The next episode will be the super exciting, at least to me, episode number 50. Not exactly sure what it's going to be yet, but it's going to be awesome. The show notes for this episode will be online at www.smartdrugsmarts.com, including links to everything that we talked about here. I'm also happy to announce that as of today, Wednesday, October 22nd, the new version of the Axon app, the companion app to Smart Drug Smarts, is now available on the iTunes store for download if you are an Apple user. We're about to come out with a native iPad version. That'll be the next version. Currently, it's just kind of the stupid scaled up stuff on iPad, but looks very nice on an iPhone. This latest version has a variable speed playback of the podcast, so if you want to hear Smart Drug Smarts slightly sped up, you are now welcome to do that. I'm sure that my dad will say no, because my dad always tells me that I talk too fast anyway, so the last thing he wants to do is hear me talking 1.5 times as fast. But the rest of you now have that option. I will be back at you next week, same time, same podcast, and with the same unflagging commitment to helping you fine-tune the performance of your own brain. Have a great week and stay smart.
You've been listening to the Smart Drug Smarts podcast. Visit us online at www.smartdrugsmarts.com and subscribe to our mailing list to keep your neurons buzzing with the latest in brain optimization. Smart Drug Smarts should be listened to for entertainment purposes only, although some guests on the show are medical doctors, most are not, and the host is just some random guy. Nothing you hear on this podcast or read at smartdrugsmarts.com should be considered medical advice. Consult your doctor and use some damn common sense before doing anything you think might have a lasting impact on your brain.